Thank you all for coming here today. My name is Beth Hedva. I'm a marriage and family child counselor. And basically what we're going to be doing here today is doing some work on healing that inner child so that we can raise ourselves up and unite with the self within, marry that self, so that we can then join all of humanity in bringing forth a new vision of who we are and what we can be and build a world together from a new perspective. The key to doing this is to releasing the wounds of betrayal and coming to trust that deeper self which is moving us through the world.
Before I begin the lecture today, I'd like to start with a story, an old folktale about a journey from betrayal to trust.
Okay, so this is the story of a little boy and a little girl. The boy's name is Kai and the girl's name is Gerda, and they happen to be the children around whom the Snow Queen is created, Hans Christian Andersen. Great story. Now the best part of the story is a part that I had totally forgotten, of course, and it starts like this. There was a troll who had created this mirror, and whatever looked in this mirror turned ugly and terrible. No matter how grand it was, no matter how magnificent, no matter how beautiful, it looked paltry and puny. And likewise, those things which were worthless, totally meaningless, dust, turned into magnificence in this mirror. And the troll said, "We have the mirror of truth. This is how things really look." And so what the trolls did was they started showing the mirror all over the place, showing what people really look like. Well, they had this grand idea. They decided they were going to take this mirror up to the angels and see what God really looked like, okay? So they started going up, 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 up to take the mirror up. And what happened? But the angels in the mirror just kept laughing and laughing and laughing. And eventually they were laughing so hard that they cracked the mirror. And the mirror broke and splintered all over the world. And the problem is that when a piece of this mirror falls in your eye or falls in your heart, you see things totally distorted. And fragments of this mirror are floating around all over the world still today. Which brings us to the beginning of our story. There was this little boy named Kai and this little girl named Gerda. And they were best friends. They really were. They lived right next door to each other. And they played together all the time. And to make a long story short, Kai got a piece of this glass mirror in his eye and in his heart. And he started treating Gerda in just terrible ways. Being cold to her, being unconcerned. And she didn't understand what was going on. But to complicate the story even more, one day, Kai was looking out the window and kind of got mesmerized by a snowflake. And this snowflake started collecting other snowflakes until eventually the snowflake turned into a beautiful woman. But she was totally cold. She was frozen. She was the Snow Queen. And she took Kai off with her. And Gerda never knew what happened. And Gerda's story is another story. There are actually 7 stories in the story of the Snow Queen, but I'm just going to finish the story with Kai so we know what happened to Kai. Basically, what happened to Kai was he went with the Snow Queen out to the land way, 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 way at the north, at the end of the world. And she lived on a little frozen island in the middle of the Lake of Reason. And I'm not making this up. It's in Hans Christian Andersen. And the lake was like a mirror also. And what happened was, first she kissed Kai on the forehead, and he totally froze, got totally cold. And then she gave him one more kiss, and his heart froze over. And she said, "I better not kiss you anymore because I'll kill you." So she stopped kissing him entirely. And then what happened was they entered into the domain of the Snow Queen, and it was vast, and it was empty, and it was bleak, and desolate and very cold. And Kai got kind of taken up with piling pieces of ice, making these pretty things. It was more fun than blocks, and he thought that this was like really important. And there was some way that she had of relating to him where he realized that he didn't know so much after all, and that maybe what he was doing wasn't so important because she knew more than he knew. After all, she lived in the lake of reason. Well, once again, to make a long story short, Gerda goes through 5 other stories trying to find Kai. I'm not going to go into her story, but she does eventually get to this frozen wasteland. And she finds Kai, and she begins to cry, and cry, and cry. And what happens is her tears melt Kai's heart. And Kai recognizes her, and he begins to cry. And he cries and cries and cries, and finally the glass is washed out of his eye. And he continues crying, and it's washed out of his heart, too. And finally, the 2 of them escape together from the Snow Queen's domain. And how they return back is yet another story. But the key is the willingness to feel the grief, to go through the depths of our emotions in healing those early, early wounds, which have distorted our perception and taught us that we don't know the truth of our own heart. Now, today, the focus of our work is to move from betrayal to trust. And betrayal has quite a bit of history behind it. There's a lot of support for staying in betrayal. And we're going to learn some tools and techniques today on how it is we can actually shift beyond the betrayal mode into a new state of awareness. Now, I'd like to start with just a little bit of etymology on the word betrayal itself, and that'll help give an understanding of how it is that we continue to betray ourselves, betray each other, betray our loved ones, betray our ideals, our dreams, whatever it might be. The word betrayal comes from the Latin root word tradere. Now, interestingly enough, in addition to betrayal, it also obviously includes the word traitor, and it also includes the word tradition, which I think is really fascinating, that there's something about tradition which is inherent in the experience of betrayal, being betrayed. And it means, literally, to hand over or to deliver. When we hand ourselves over to a traditional response based on our past, based on our history, based on our cultural upbringing, based on our entire cultural milieu, we then have delivered ourselves into betrayal. The key to moving beyond betrayal is to act in a non-traditional, that is, non-betraying way. We don't have a lot of history, though, on how to act in a non-betraying way. We've got lots of history, lots of support for following through with the traditional response. Now, James Hillman identifies 5 stages of the traditional betrayal response, and I just want to write those down real quick here. And I'm sure that we'll all be familiar with these. There's not a single one here that we haven't done. I guarantee it. The first experience in relationship to betrayal is based on revenge. We feel, when we are betrayed, we feel so resentful and so hurt that all we want to do is get that other person to hurt as much as we hurt. That is the first step. Now, there can be, according to Hillman, a healthy release of energy if you do not dwell on this phase. If when you are angry and hurt, you simply are out with it and say, that really hurt me. How could you do that? Or whatever. It opens communication. However, most of us do not do that. Most of us begin to fester on the experience of being betrayed. And because of our cultural upbringing and heritage, we've learned not to act out on our immediate response. So instead, we begin to obsess and plot and plan. Oh, when's the best betrayal? How can I really get that person and really get them to hurt as much as I can hurt? Now, if we are enlightened beings and we're above all of that, then we do it unconsciously. Okay? And usually we'll do it in ways that are similar to avoiding the person, withdrawing from the person, separating from the person, rather than acknowledging the depth of the experience. The second phase, after revenge, is we begin to move into an experience called projection of the shadow. Now, in this phase or stage, we tend to see only the negative in that person that we once loved so well. Where they were once glorious and kind and considerate, they're now arrogant and uncaring and unfeeling and insensitive. And that's all there is to it. There's no other part about this person. Projection of the shadow. We see only the negative. Now, I call it projection because the truth is, whenever we're seeing something negative in another person out there, it's also true about some aspect of ourselves. And the healing of the betrayal response comes from recognizing the negative out there as something which also lies in here, inside ourselves. And we'll be talking more about that today. Now, let's say, though, that we continue on with the traditional betrayal response. We don't heal the shadow. We don't recognize it as something within. It is out there. I know it. You know, and if I'm, let's say I'm a man and I've been burned by my lover, well then, this is like every other lover I've ever been with, and I can't understand why I keep choosing women like this. And all of those women, they're always like this. We move into stage 3, which is generalization. Of the negative. Now, I'd like to say that it's not just all men or all women or all Democrats or all Republicans or all whoever we deem is just like our betrayer. This is the phase that is directly related to racism, prejudice, and bigotry, where we immediately go into identifying a whole group based on a personal wound. And there's no recognition of this. Now, there is a way of healing this as well, which is, rather than generalizing, we begin to break down into the specifics again. Well, maybe it's not this whole group. Maybe there's something unique here that I'm supposed to be learning. And then we can begin to focus in on ourselves again. We'll be getting more into this as the talk progresses. How do we shift the attention from the generalization and the cynicism which comes up from this? Because if we get too far into the cynicism, we end up losing contact with something which is very essential and very precious to each of us. That is our own vital dream. Our own vital dream dies. And this leads to what Hillman calls self-betrayal. Once we've lost our vision of humanity, love, work, whatever it is that we have been so deeply wounded and believe that it's no longer possible, when we have lost that, we start heading into a very deep downward spiral, which takes us to the fifth stage of the traditional betrayal response. And that is one of fear and control. And what we have when we start going through life being totally afraid that my needs are not going to get met, first of all, because it's impossible in this world and nobody would be able to do it, especially you, okay? What I end up trying to do is create contracts and agreements with people, because I can't trust them to keep their agreement, but if I have a contract, they damn well better, because then I've got some recourse. Now, these are not just legal contracts. We also do this with each other in terms of personal contracts, spoken and unspoken. Like fidelity in relationship is usually an unspoken contract. And it's usually a way out of relationship also when somebody breaks that unspoken contract. Or there could be other kinds of contracts, like you'll be there for me when I'm ill. And then when you're not there for me when I'm ill, once I get my health again, I'm gone, whatever it might be. What we end up having, though, is, again, it's all externally based on another person's action to me. I choose how it is that I'm going to respond. And I try to control and, of course, manipulate others to get what it is that I want and need. This is as far from trust as we can possibly get. Control and manipulation based on fear is the opposite of trust. So then it becomes a question of how do we get back to trust? Which we can do, by the way. That's what we're here for. The key to moving beyond the traditional betrayal response is based on working with the material as a sacred event. When we recognize that every experience in life is a part of our spiritual journey, a part of our spiritual path, we can take the experience then and use it to come closer to ourselves, to our true selves. Which brings us to an interesting play on words, on the word trust. I'd just like to read to you all of the different words associated with the word trust. In addition to the word trust, the word truth, true, truth, troth, and betroth all come from the word trust, which is an Old English word, trio, which literally translates as fidelity and faithfulness. Loyalty. When we are able to get back to the truth of our own being, what is it that's really true for me? Recontacting that vital dream, I'm able to come to some kind of a truce between the warring factions within my own nature. I remember a very sacred troth a very sacred vow that I must be betrothed to the one within myself first. And as I honor that sacred vow, then I am whole. And I can come forward in the world in a whole new way. I maintain loyalty and faithfulness, a vow of fidelity to that sacred self within first, which has dreams and visions of how life can be, which can, through my intuitive ability, perceive the truth not only within myself, but in another human being, which can recognize both the positive and negative within myself, as well as in another human being, and can have, therefore, compassion on another human being who is acting out of their own wound more often than not. I had a wonderful opportunity a couple weeks ago to work with a couple. He was the betrayer, she was the betrayed. It was classic, it was wonderful. They had bought a house together 2 years ago. For the entire 2 years that they were living together, she was certain that he was sleeping with some other woman. He said, no, I'm not. They went to therapy for it. They stayed in therapy for, I don't know however long it was, 9 months or whatever, maybe more. Within that time, she became the identified patient. What's with her that she's so jealous, okay? Turns out that this woman that she had suspected that he was with was moving back into the area. The issue came up again, and suddenly, after 2 years, he said, you know what? You were right. I was with this other person. Betrayed, right? Major betrayal. Now, the beauty of this is that it gives both of them an opportunity to grow in very, very deep ways. First, it became clear that for her, the betrayal was an experience of betrayal around feeling abandoned by her beloved. She was so much wanting him to be the one to show her how lovable she was. She wasn't being loved the right way. That was her complaint. Okay. He, on the other hand, as we continued working with him, she somehow fell into the category of all women, which somehow got back to Mom. Funny how that happens sometimes. Which meant that he had some very deep healing that he needed to do as well. An interesting thing, these different betrayal wounds. The betrayal of the mother is a betrayal of self-trust. When I am betrayed by my mother, I don't trust myself. It's very simple. When I am betrayed by my father, I don't trust my direction or purpose in life. I don't trust my direction or purpose, where it is that I'm going, the thing I have to contribute to the world, which is my unique vital dream or gift. If I'm betrayed by both mother and father, I don't have a self to fulfill that purpose anyway, you see. Both of those must be healed. Now the gift in all of this, the remarkable gift, consciousness has a way of timing events that are totally beyond our linear concept of how things should be. Consciousness has a way of saying, I have a seed here, and I want this seed to flower, after 20, maybe 40 years, whatever. And then I want it to bear fruit. And then I want this fruit to plant seeds. Well, if left on its own, it would plant itself and bear fruit within 3 to 5 years. That's us. We're born. Once we can start talking and we're out there doing it, if we didn't have anything preventing us, so to speak, we would be out there with it all immediately. But can you imagine a 3-year-old or 5-year-old child trying to run for president? I mean, it just wouldn't work, you know? There are things that having a certain level of timing, age, experience, wisdom, resources, contacts, there are things that we each need in order to move forward and fulfill our vital dream. So consciousness has this way of impeding our growth. Cleverly, very cleverly, through our parents and siblings and bosses and teachers and friends. Somehow we get wounded and we think, okay, that's it. I'm not growing anymore. And then we get tired of that after a while and we decide to work on ourselves. At exactly the right time that we have the maturity, the wisdom, and the ability to come forward with our strengths in the world. I like to think of our childhood wounds as time release capsules, just waiting for us. And if we ever get through the wound, we re-find our tremendous gifts. Not only the gifts from childhood, which were inherent in our beingness, the gifts from our spiritual self, but those blend then with the gifts of this world, when we have the facility to fulfill our dreams.